I don't have a great deal of insights to be able to share with you. I was very impressed by the panel earlier this morning in terms of their broad perspective and in particular some of the things that the HTX initiative is doing in Ontario. Also very interested by my co-panelist in terms of her really very thoughtful analysis of some of the key issues. I'm in the trenches. I've spent most of my career as a practicing lawyer helping small, early-stage entrepreneurs raise capital in Ontario. There have been some good times over these past couple of decades, and then there have been some really difficult times. I'm encouraged by what I've seen by those here and some of the other initiatives that I'm aware of, both provincially and federally. And certainly whenever I have an opportunity to talk about the issues, I continue to believe that this is the best time in our country's history for us to be engaged in commercializing innovation and in particular in the health sector, and that we have enormous opportunity to take advantage of the tremendous intellectual power that we have across this country and achieve greater success. That being said, I spent earlier in my career a couple of years in government, a great privilege to work within the government of Ontario. And actually I was there at the time that the government created the Labour-sponsored Venture Capital Corporation program and played some very, very modest role in helping to draft some of the regulations. A very controversial program, and certainly if you talk to people in the business community or the financial community, there's some strong views. Some people really thought it was very, very valuable, and having attracted to Ontario something like $3 billion of capital, a good portion of it was employed for relatively early stage initiatives. And then there are others, of course, who had the perspective of economists or people responsible for Treasury and fiscal policy who concluded that, in fact, it was not a very effective program and that the private sector was strong enough and able enough to actually fill the gap in a much more efficient manner. My sense is that was a very brave and bold policy position to have taken a couple of years ago as we were entering a very serious economic downturn. And I'm one of those who regret profoundly that we abandoned the opportunity to build a more stable and secure and better resourced venture capital community by having made the choices, the policy choices that we did. I'm going to. I've got not a great deal to add to the debate or the discussion, and I welcome the opportunity to leave enough time so we actually can take some comments and get some input from the audience. We live in a public policy environment that is, I think, both a huge opportunity for all of us as private citizens, as individuals involved in the commercialization process, and of course as policymakers. Within that context, it seems to me that as someone from the private sector, there are three broad ways in which governments can be influential in changing the natural pace of innovation in respect of health technologies. And I'll talk very, very briefly about these three broad areas. One is investment incentives. Second area is research and development incentives. A third area, and I come at procurement from a different vantage, incentives to actually encourage private sector enterprise and to do so through the procurement system. And then finally, some thoughts, some very broad thoughts in terms of some ideas that are circulating around where I think governments, in fact, can be an important contributor. So investment incentives, well, there are, quite frankly, a myriad of programs and activities that have been developed by thoughtful and well-meaning members of governments, both federal and provincial. I pulled a list off the Ministry of Research and Innovation website. It goes on for several pages, and these are a few that jump out. I will say, having heard John this morning, I'm really impressed by what you and your organization are doing. They sound to be really sensible and thoughtful and very effective efforts to draw the parties together and to fill that very important gap in terms of the sort of initiation of the technology development process. But there are a number of other programs that, as I look down that list, some of which I've tried to access on behalf of clients. I'm not sure that they necessarily are working at an optimal level. And a thought for government is that we ought to build into every program a process of review and evaluation soon after it's launched. Not in an effort to try to be critical, but rather to achieve the objectives that were initially proposed for the programs. And I offer that just as an observation. In terms of research and development incentives, it seems to me we really have our act together. The SR&ED program is an internationally recognized program that achieves a very significant positive impact, subject obviously to the qualifications that were suggested earlier today about the fact that you actually need capital to be able to, in fact, take advantage of these incentives. And then there are a variety of equally excellent granting programs and agencies, both federally and provincially. So my assessment is, undoubtedly we can do better, but that piece of the puzzle, it seems to me, we've really knocked it out of the park. And then the third piece, the procurement incentives issue. Now, I put on the list a couple of tools that governments have focused on the drug piece. I read, a couple of months ago, just found it on the internet, a very interesting report that a consulting house in Quebec, Secor, did on the biopharmaceutical industry in Quebec, and it looked at the history of the industry over the past 15 or 20 years and considered the various government policies that had been initiated and put in place and considered their effectiveness. And they talked about the procurement decisions being made by the provincial plan with respect to drugs and how that had been one of the drivers to attract perhaps a disproportionate amount of research and development activity to the province. And then they also talked about the Quebec 15-year rule, where notwithstanding the expiry of patents with respect to pharmaceuticals, one enjoyed a 15-year privilege relative to generic entry, and that as a result, Quebec had something like 45 or 50% of research and development dollars that are spent in the pharmaceutical sector, notwithstanding the fact that it had about 25% of the population and compared to Ontario, a relatively smaller sort of basic research and development environment. So my takeaway is that government policies really can be very effective if they're focused and they're targeted in terms of being able to achieve results that might not otherwise be expected. So proposed a direction and ideas that governments ought to be considering, and those that are being proposed and advocated by the private sector. I'm not going to go through the whole list, but there is one idea on that list that I think ought to resonate both with the medtech as well as the larger or the medical pharmaceutical or biopharmaceutical sector, and that's the notion of creating flow-through share programs for medical technologies. There's this perception that Canadians aren't risk takers, that we're too conservative, we're unwilling to invest in the future of the economy, and I think that's a very unfair assessment of Canada when I think of what we've accomplished in terms of natural resources, and how bold and imaginative so many entrepreneurs have been in terms of actually developing an economy, a commodity-based economy that is really second to none. That being said, government has played a very important role in attracting capital to that part of our economy that might not otherwise, certainly wouldn't have otherwise been formed at the same levels. And it was the flow-through share concept where the losses that are initially incurred by those who are involved in exploration and development in the natural resources sector are being able to be passed through to investors. In my mind, the 21st century notion of sort of research or exploration in terms of natural resources is really the medical sector, and the same general privileges And the same general commitment of government should be reflected in terms of an ability for investors to be able to invest in that sector without the inherent absolute risk that they would otherwise bear. So it's an idea that's been debated for a number of years. There have been a number of delegations that have been sent to Ottawa to make the case. It may be very difficult in the context of the current fiscal environment to carry the day, but in my mind, it's something that deserves further consideration, and this community, my view anyway, ought to embrace it. Anyway, those are my comments, and look forward to opportunity to get your comments and questions. Thank you.